Your first London concert included Bach's Third Symphony.
That's right. It was a nice little concert. I'm very grateful to them, given to me by Morley College, the Morley College Symphony Orchestra, which was very good amateurs and very good young professionals. Yes, it was a program which, when I look back on it, turns out to have been an act of monumental stupidity. April Prologue, World Premiere, Anthony Milner. Hammersmith, Prelude and Scherzo, Holst. Delius Dance Rhapsody No. 1, Bach Symphony No. 3. Now, there's a program for you. I must have been out of my mind. The London Daily Papers gave me tremendous reviews. There was
probably the first performance of the Bach's Third. That was probably one of the rare performances of Bach's.
Very rare in those days, and one of the critics, I forget who it was, said, "Perhaps we should be grateful to Vernon Handley for allowing us to hear the last performance of Bach's Third." Well, I proved him wrong.
You sure did. Well, you actually programmed a lot of Bach's with the Guildford.
Yes, I did.
Philharmonic.
When I got the Guildford job, I determined that 25% of the music we played in Guildford should be British. This is just one man's effort to put the balance right.
Yes.
And I've obviously, to a large extent, failed in that effort. But one would like to have done so much more. But I have got to the point, at least, that I promised myself that I do, on average, I do a British work in every programme. So if I do a Mozart Requiem, in the next programme I've got to do 3 British works to make up. And I think that this is the only way, really, to get people to enjoy and understand and be stimulated by the music of their own country, is just to have it available there.
Yes.
I mean, it's quite clear, isn't it? Things like the pinching of Holst's Jupiter thing for the World Rugby a couple of years ago. Right. And now everybody sings it.
Right.
But of course they don't know who it was written by, they don't know where it comes from.
Right.
But nevertheless it was good enough for everybody to think, oh, that's a good tune.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, absolutely.
But the Guildford Orchestra was a semi-pro orchestra when I arrived in 1962. It was, you could almost say that it was a professional orchestra with amateur stiffening, rather than the other way round. But when I'd been there a couple of years, it was quite clear that it was going to improve. It had improved. We did have a following, and so therefore I asked the amateurs to take union cards and turn the whole orchestra professional. And it was such a success that the Guildford Council said yes, we'll do it. So it became a fully pro orchestra. But we did have a scheme. It was called the Playing Scholars Scheme, in which I established two chairs, one in the first and one in the second, should be for people from the colleges, the music colleges, who wanted to make playing their career. They could come along on a special fee. In actual fact, it worked very well, and a number of players who came onto that scheme have since gone on to lead some of the national orchestras and certainly sit up way up front desks. So it worked very well. And no, the orchestra, to answer your previous question, the orchestra really threw themselves into the pieces of Bach's that I put down for programme. In actual fact, they are beautiful works to play, and you've only got to let an orchestra play one of the works, then the next year another, and it's amazing how much they've remembered of the language of the first. And so, this works with all music and with all groups, but the Guildford Orchestra responded so well to any of my programs, let alone Bach's. I mean, he wasn't the only one who was helped in that way. Oh, yeah. I remember my 100th concert. They said to me, "Oh, do what you like for your 100th concert in Guildford." So I said, "Fine." And we did, I think it was Symphonic Variations, Parry, the Symphonic Variations of Bach's for piano and orchestra, and Morning Heroes, Bliss.
Oh, marvellous.
When I think of that programme, it was done on 3-hour rehearsal in the morning, 3-hour rehearsal in the afternoon, and show in the evening. I used to do this. In fact, it was the only way of getting enough money, or rather little enough money, to do concerts of that sort. So that you didn't have to pay travel twice from London. You did it all in one day. We did Massive Life in that way. Orchestra and soloists in the morning, orchestra and chorus in the afternoon with the soloists marking their parts, and concert in the evening. I used to go back into my dressing room and slide along the wall to the floor. I was so exhausted. But no, we had, not only did the orchestra throw themselves into it, but we had a wonderful audience.
Oh.
My first season there, which I hadn't chosen, I stepped into the conducting position there because the previous incumbent had died in the summer.
Mm.
And so that season was planned by that man. And that season we had an audience attendance average of 47%, I think. The next year it was 76%, and the year after that it was 85%. And it very rarely, in the next 21 years, very rarely fell below 70.
Hmm.
But I did appalling programs, I must say.
Probably, though, due to a revitalized orchestra as well as the programming.
Yes.
Interesting, because
Yes,
music that
people
wasn't
wanted to
being
play.
played anywhere else.
That's right, people wanted to play.
And played well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I did have remarkable players. The freelance pool in those days was remarkable in London, you see. There was so much work about then. There's no work now. But there was so much work with a lot of film music sessions and so on.
Right.
So some people who loved playing symphonic music but didn't want the grind of one of the orchestras, they would go and do their film sessions and come and get their classics at the weekend in Guildford.
There was an article talking about some technical problem in one of the pieces, I think it was the Enigma Variations. And they were talking about how different conductors interpret it and the problems that they have. It was from the point of view of the timpanists.
Yeah, I think that one of the big problems about technique is that when one talks about technique, one is immediately suspected by some people of talking about the mechanics of conducting. Now, when I talk about stick technique, I don't mean that. A technique is a way of getting certain results, and therefore the technique is important not just mechanically. It's very, very important spiritually as well. If you're going to convey certain ideas to an orchestra by means of your gesture or stick, then those gestures have got to be very deeply thought out. And I think I remember that the Enigma one is probably the variation which the timpani starts, isn't it? That's the one. Now, that's fast. And Elgar actually puts semibrief. In other words, Elgar, although very, very practical man indeed, felt it as one in a bar. But if you do one in a bar, your timpanist finds it very, very difficult indeed, because it's quite a slow beat, one in a bar, to get his transferred accents right. But if you do two in a bar, even though it's very fast, it'll sound like one in a bar, because the timpanist will now be able to phrase his notes around the beat, where before he would have been watching a great loop of beat. But now he's got the second beat to hang on to, and that cleans it up straight away. That's one little trick. If you magnify that, if you multiply that 1,000,000 times, you've got technique, and yet it will be amazing. I've seen it so many times. I've heard and seen conductors who are towering musicians actually get that one wrong, because they haven't thought of it from a conducting technique point of view. They've thought of it purely musically. Yes, it must feel like one in a bar, but to feel like one in a bar, you may have to beat two. If you beat one, it will probably come out that there's no actual repetition that's right. Because, you can see, can't you, a beat, 1, 2. That's a long way up and down there. So a timpanist has got to get what is a fast figure to a slow beat.
Oh, yes.
Of course, this is the problem, that you get something technical right, and sometimes you then are condemned for being technical.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean? Yes, of course, you've got a wonderful technique, implied, but...
But I never have ever heard you give a bad performance. And more often than not, your performance is the one that's right at the top.
It's an extraordinary thing. It's very, very kind of you, and it's very humbling to hear it in a way, because, as I was saying earlier, I sense that if I'd only had the luck to have a bigger career, I could have done so much more for British music, and I still feel now that, I've never had the chance really of some of these things like Moran, Bax, Robert Simpson. I've never had the chance really to put them across to the public with any sort of force, because usually it comes out to be just one performance, and then you're on to something else.
Right.
And we can't do the Moran Symphony 3 times in a week because it's going to be at 3 different places in the north of England where we won't get an audience.
Right.
But in actual fact, what I needed to do was to do what Ronnie did, but even more so. He did champion British music. Bolt did as well, though he could have done much more. But I've not been in that position for one reason or another. You see, I haven't recorded, for instance, I've conducted the Bach symphonies more than anybody living or dead, but I haven't recorded them.
I know.
They've been recorded 3 times.
Just so frustrating. Which is really the great frustration for all of us Bachians, is why has the greatest interpreter of these symphonies, why has Bach's greatest interpreter not been able to record these symphonies? I think it's the recording companies that have let us down by not taking advantage of this great opportunity to record you in this music.
Actually, I think 1 or 2 of them could have done a little more. I mean, I'm personally very, very grateful to Hyperion and Chandos for the chances that they gave me, to do a lot of unfamiliar pieces. I mean, the chance of recording the Moran Symphony when I was in Belfast.
Oh, yes.
That was wonderful, because that is a remarkable orchestra. Beautiful orchestra.
Did Bolt ever advise you not to make a career out of championing British music?
I think he did, and I think it occurred to him. He never discussed it with me. One of the things that he did say to me was that I mustn't conduct anything that wasn't first class. That's to say, if he saw me doing an unfamiliar piece, unfamiliar by all means, but if he felt that the piece itself wasn't worthy, he'd say, you mustn't be seen doing that sort of thing. This was when I was starting. You must be seen doing the big main repertoire. So it was, what you imply was definitely in his mind in a way. But on the other hand, you see, he did say things to me which I took more or less as gospel, and they turned out to be not exactly as valuable as one would have hoped. For instance, I can remember saying to him in the 60s once, should I be looking up the works of Granville Bantock? And because Bolt had known him. And he said, oh, charming man, wonderful man, very, very clever man. Spoke 5 languages fluently, including Chinese, wonderful, wonderful fellow. And a fine host. But the music, well, I mean, what is it after all? 4 pages of Richard Strauss followed by 4 pages of Hebridean folk song. No, I don't think I'd bother if I were you. So I didn't, because Bolt was everything to me in those days. So I didn't look up the band. He knew that I was mad keen to explore all areas of British music, but he was closing that door to me because he didn't think it was worth it. Then, only 6 or 7 years ago, Ted Perry got in touch with me and said, would I like to record some Hyperion? And I said, send me some scores. And he sent some down to me, and the first day I was sitting with one of them in my study, I called up to Catherine, and I'd made an awful mistake. And she said, why, you don't want to record it? And I said, no, it's not that. I'm reading a masterpiece. And I was reading a masterpiece. And now we've done 5 of them.
You have a new disc out.
Yeah.
Just
5
came out.
records, 5 CDs. During the recording of the second one, Ted Perry said to me, Todd, we must do a Bantock a year. And I said, what a lovely idea, Ted. You're looking at 12 CDs before we get to the big stuff.
In the 1970s and 80s, that's when you were making your recordings of Vaughan Williams and Elgar and Walton. And at that point, you became established as the leading champion of British music. And you've been so closely identified with this repertoire, do you think that's denied you other opportunities?
Well, I think it probably has. It wouldn't matter to me if I'd been able to do more. Mm-hmm. In other words, I don't mind how much British music I do, provided that I'm considered to be at least at the level of conductors where, if you listen to it, you are getting a representative result. Mm. But if you do concentrate on unusual repertoire, unfamiliar repertoire, in the same way as if you concentrate, as I have, on the economy of means in actual physical conducting, there's no doubt about it that superficially you don't make a straight impression. It's either you make a big impression with people who are already philosophically agreed with you about the technique of conducting, and people who are susceptible to that particular repertoire. Mm. So I don't know whether I got the balance right. I think I've probably got it wrong over the years. But I do love my Brahms and my Beethoven and Rachmaninoff. And as anybody will tell you, that quite honestly, Todd can make Prokofiev sound like Vaughan Williams in a few bars. But I do love my Prokofiev as well. But the fact is that people don't, well, the people in Great Britain usually don't ask me to do those things. So it is sometimes perceived that I only do the British repertoire, which is not true.
Which is not true.
And therefore, in some ways, yes, it has been a disadvantage. I don't know why it should be that if a person coming from Germany specialises in Brahms and Beethoven, that we should bring him to Great Britain and say, gosh, he's a great specialist in Brahms and Beethoven. Well, why shouldn't there be a specialist in Vaughan Williams and Holst?
Absolutely.
And the thing that I hate as well about the critics who say something like this, the strength of Stravinsky and Bartok is their reliance on their roots of folk music, both Russian and Hungarian. And then in the next sentence, Holst and Vaughan Williams are weakened immeasurably by the fact that their roots are firmly in British folk song. And so it's all right for the Hungarians, it's all right for the Russians, but not for the British. And that sort of general reception is one of the things that I've tried to find. I think I've had reasonable success with some things, but I would like to have done a whole lot more.
Yeah. Some of your very first recordings were of Tchaikovsky.
Oh yes, yes. In actual fact, a rather lovely. I remember an LPO doing Francesca da Rimini.
Yes.
And really bringing it off just as I wanted.
Fantastic performance. I wish those would be reissued. I hope someday they will be.
Yeah, because the sound wasn't bad, was it?
No, that was great. And you said too that your grounding in music was in the German masters. I mean,
yes,
you came to that first before you came to British music.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. When I was, if you'd seen me at young Kellen's age, 13 or so, I would have been standing at a table somewhere with a Wagner score open in front of me, conducting the whole thing in silence. So yes, I did all that before I came to British music. But when I came to British music, there was a thunderclap in my life. One of the early works that I appreciated, which we could elaborate, was The Garden Fanned. And I remember having read it in a rather large study score that they produced in those days. And I read it, and I was almost unable to breathe properly for about 3 days because I was so taken away, especially by that glorious tune in the middle. And Bax is one of those people who can write a tune whenever he likes.
Oh yes.
A bit of a melody. And 3 or 4 days I was walking around gasping because every time I thought of some of those harmonies and once again his structure of the whole piece, the marvellous arch structure that he has there, I was literally, taken short of your breath, rather like you are if you jump in a cold swimming pool.
We'll do that. Looking at a conductor like Günter Wand, who does very little. I mean, he specializes in Bruckner, he specializes in Brahms and Beethoven. And in Germany, he's revered.
Yeah.
Now we have a conductor in yourself who specializes in Vaughan Williams, Holst, Walton, and probably, if I may say, has no equal in that repertoire. I see you as a similar sort of conductor as Gunther Avant, who just is such a great master in this particular area. And
I'm flattered by that because he is a master. In fact, thinking about his conducting rather than mine for a moment, he strikes me as being kind of having the kind of integrity, Richard, that would reach out to Elgar in a big way.
Yes.
I wish I could hear him do some Elgar.
wouldn't that be something?
Do you think, I don't certainly do not believe that British music is only for British conductors. Certainly not. One of the finest performances of the Fifth Symphony, Vaughan Williams, I've ever heard was Rostosvinsky.
Yes.
Absolutely superb, and such a considered performance as well. There's another man who doesn't like rehearsing very much, but the homework had been done.
Yes. Yes. You've recorded the complete sets of symphonies of Robert Simpson and Malcolm Arnold. And I'm wondering what it's like to conduct the music of a living composer, especially when they're with you in the recording studio.
With those two composers, you couldn't have chosen two more different personalities. Incidentally, in Malcolm Arnold's case, you're right, I have recorded all of them. Because it's not only the 9 orchestral symphonies, but there's a symphony for strings, which I've done as well.
Right.
But with Simpson, I haven't recorded them all, because there is an 11th, which he wrote specifically for a young musician, Matthew Taylor, who is going to do, I hope he will be on the record doing that 11th symphony. It seemed a bit odd for me to do 10 and have somebody else do one, but it was written for him, and I'm perfectly happy about that. On the same record, I will be there with a couple of the concertos.
Oh, good.
10
was written for you.
Yeah, that's right. 10 was dedicated to me. I think it was because of what I did for 9. I did the world premiere of 9.
Yes.
And the first
Fabulous.
The first recording, of course, which was Record of the Year.
Yes, I remember.
And it is a remarkable piece. But I think that Bob was so fascinated by seeing me down there in Bournemouth, reading it, as it were, the orchestra reading from scratch, of course, how far we got into it before I was forced to stop. But very, very different. Malcolm Arnold seems not to be listening very well when he's in the control room, but comes out with some extraordinary shouts and expletives while one's working, some of which are really apposite. They are to the point, but some of which are very much off the point. With Bob Simpson, he is listening, he is watching always. He was there, with his head in the score, and anything that he said, when you've done a take or done a bit of rehearsing, anything that he said was absolutely right bang on what you needed, Amazing. Of course, a lovely sense of humour, which always lightens sessions, which can get a bit tense. And he was always, the interesting thing about him in recording sessions, he was always asking for more expressive playing. That's to say, he'd say, there's a lot of me in that passage, there's a lot of me in there. That doesn't sound, as if I'm very interesting. Then he put his finger on a couple of points, and immediately one would realise, where one was lacking, and would go out and get a cleaner take for him. And he knew, of course, of my love for Bax, and he didn't admire Bax at all.
I was good. He did not?
No, not at all. He was very kind about him once or twice. In his little book about the proms, he includes Bax amongst those people who ought to have been better represented, which is Bob Simpson showing his integrity, quite right too. But I said to him one day, this was before the 10th Symphony, it was when we were recording the 9th, and I said to him, well, if you're doing this 10th, and he said, and you're going to have it, Todd, it's going to be yours. And I said, thank you very much. Could I ask them for a sort of signature? He said, what do you want? And I said, well, I'd like to have a passage where the cellos and the horns are together in middle register, mezzo forte, and double basses are the only accompanists. He said, "Oh, God, that sounds like a bit of your Bach's." I didn't tell him very painful.
You can imagine that the Bax would not be a composer that he.
Well.
He loves
now
Nelson.
there it is. You see, this business of him not seeing the wood for the trees. All of us not seeing the wood for the trees. People not understanding that orchestral music, that the symphonies are very tightly structurally controlled. Bach is a formal giant, and yet somebody as perspicacious as Bob Simpson didn't necessarily see that. Of course, Bob Simpson's scores are never as chromatically demanding as Bach's scores, and I often wonder whether it's this business of people's ears accepting one accent where they can't hear another. Do you know, sometimes you will go into a company where there are mixed accents, and somebody says something to you from, and he's come from Ayrshire, you will understand just about what he says, and then someone who comes from Midlothian, you think he's speaking Hungarian. Do you know, just an accent, just a dialect. And I think that an awful lot of people, even people as profoundly sensitive as Bob Simpson, do not hear the structure in Bach's because they're hearing the stuff on top of it. Mm-hmm. But of course, Bach might have said, but who wants to see the skeleton?
Right.
As long as it's there.
As long as it's there.
Right.
Is that really what the music's about?
That's right.
One of my suspicions with Bach's is that his music is so uninhibited, and his music is so much about emotional states. And I think it was Mark Elder who said that's one of the things that he loves about the music is the uninhibited quality, just the expressiveness of it. And he says that's very un-British, Matt. And I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons why he's not been appreciated in this country.
Yes. Well, I think Mark Elder has certainly touched on something there which is very, very important. I'd only wish to say to him, but in the symphonies, Bach pares down his style because he is now writing symphony, which means form,
right.
And it also means that the form should be allowed to be more on the surface, because that's why we're appreciating it simply because of its development.
And he's referring more to Spring Fire.
Yes,
as
of course.
As his example.
And of course, he's quite right about that. There are very few tunes in Bach's that don't start my tear ducts going. And I think that in that respect, Marcus has put his finger right on it. But the thing that worries me about Bach's is that even in a work as clearly formal as The Garden of Fan, people don't spot it. And they don't see that it is terribly important in The Garden of Fan, which is a work of real genius, that starts with certain material, other material supersedes it or is grafted on top of it. Then there is a passage which is Big Waves. Then there is the dance in Fan's Island. Then is Fan's Song of Immortal Love. After Fan's Song of Immortal Love, there is the dance again. So we've reached an arch, and we're going back down. And each of the features that occurred in the arch on the way up occur exactly in place on the way down. It is a piece of classical form, absolutely rigorous, and it's not appreciated.
And he's not given credit for it.
You see, Bolt used to say to me, "Oh, Tintagel was a wonderful formula in Tintagel." I said, "Yes, of course. It was not always so with Bach's." And I said, "Well, to me it is." And when he was recording Fan with the LPO, I said, "How did Fan go this morning?" Because I hadn't been able to get the session. And he said, "Oh, well enough. I think I brought Don Lenaud's Parcham in to read while they were doing the tapes." Bach's, you see. Bach's drank. He drank.
And I'm afraid that comes through in that performance. I first knew the Bolt Tintagel from the Reach recording.
Yeah, excellent.
Which is beautifully done.
Yeah.
Right? But then I heard Sir John Barbaroli's recording. And it was like a completely different piece.
Yeah.
And I thought, my God, this is a conductor who really knows and loves this music.
Oh yes.
I mean, the bolt was very straight.
Yep.
It was very good, but it's a little earthbound. And then Barbaroli, who puts the passion in the music. And
Absolutely.
I thought, my God, that's really how this music should
Yes.
be played.
Yes,
In all
you're
fairness
right.
to Bolt, I went back and heard his Decca recording that he made in the 1950s, which is astounding.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
that passion and
Yeah.
intensity is there. It's not
That's
there
right.
so much in the Rita recording, but
Did you have Barbaroli's Garden of Fans?
oh yes.
Yeah. Well,
And I heard that
think
next.
I think that is the best recording I've found.
Next to yours.
I
Next
haven't
to
recorded
your
it. I haven't recorded it.
no, on your tape, your broadcast performance, which I have, with the NCOS, which I brought with
Oh,
me.
you haven't got that one. Now
That is
that is my
astounding
best
performance.
That's my best performance of Fan.
So that surpasses
Oh, I'm
Barbaroli.
so glad you got it because I've lost it.
I got it.
Yeah.
But yes, I got that.
I was really happy. There's a mistake I think in the viola solo somewhere. But aside from that,
That's the great
those youngsters
performance.
loved it.
That's the great
They
performance
really
of that
did have it.
piece. That's the
I'm
great
so
performance.
glad you got that.
No, it's been a revelation. I hear your recording of the Third Symphony, and I think that's the way that symphony should go.
That was BBC Philharmonic, was it?
That was
As
the
Northern
yes,
Symphony.
yeah,
as it
Northern
was then.
Symphony. That's
Yeah.
the way that
I
symphony
seem
should
to
go.
remember there's a mistake in the horn part at the end. But once again, they
minor.
played it what
It's
I
there,
wanted.
it's very
They
minor.
really
It
played
doesn't-
what I wanted. And I remember that performance because I've done the third a number of times since. But I remember that performance particularly for the tightness of the first movement that they gave me.
It's
But
stunning.
what an individual piece! There is nothing anywhere in the repertoire like Bach's Third.
No.
I mean, what a courageous thing to do to put an epilogue like that.
Right.
This wonderful, almost almost a dirge, isn't it? But not necessarily just a suffering dirge. It has this beautiful.
Oh, it's
Always
otherworldly. It's
questing.
Yes,
There's
questing.
always something about it that he's looking forward to something very beautiful,
Yes.
and has a great it expresses great reverence, that epilogue as well.
All of them.
All of them.
All of them symphonies are so great.
Very good.
I mean, it's very difficult to find one that isn't.